Why do I always find the people more interesting than the mission? This is Dave's Movie Diary, where I revisit films I've watched throughout my life and look at them through the perspective of who I am now. Not just whether they still work, but what they reveal about the characters and the stories and the person watching them years later. Today I'm revisiting The Dirty Dozen, Robert Aldrich's 1967 World War II classic, starring Lee Marvin, John Cassavetes, Charles Bronson, Jim Brown, Donald Sutherland, Telly Savalas, Ernest Borgnine, who else? Robert Ryan, plenty of others too. Why did I choose this film to have a look at? Well, it's a film that's always been there. It's just one of those films that gets referred to a lot and that people simply accept as a classic and don't think too much more about these days, and I guess don't consider it in any other way. It was one of my dad's favourite movies. He refers to it a lot and recalls it. He would have been about 25 when it came out, and I reckon for his generation, World War II was still close enough to feel real and was such a seminal event for his generation. So the idea of all these movie stars coming together on a dangerous military mission must have been irresistible. And when this came out in 1967, films were still at the heart of the culture. And I can see his generation going to films a lot. Obviously, when he was young, and my mum too, they went to lots of films. You know, every Saturday you'd go to movies, you go and see a movie. But even by the late 60s, movies were still an event, and this film's definitely an event film. And I'd always assumed that I'd seen it, and I probably have, but not from. I haven't sat down and watched it start to finish. I'm pretty sure. It would have been on in the 80s when I was in my early teens. So once I started watching it, nothing looked familiar. I couldn't recall anything about it, none of it. So I'm certain I've never watched it from start to finish. So this is really a first viewing. That's the way I'm treating it. And this film came out, like I said, in 1967, the same year as Bonnie and Clyde. And what I find interesting from watching Bonnie and Clyde not that long ago is that they're both similar in that they're quite dark films, really. Death is at the heart of both of these films, and a lot of violence. But there's a lot of humour, especially with The Dirty Dozen, but also with Bonnie and Clyde. There's humoristic aspects to it, humour mixed with violence, and these darker films were becoming so much more popular. The fact that these films both came out in 67 at the height of Vietnam, and the Cold War looming over everything does indicate that changing of attitudes, looking at bleak subject matter and finding light in it. Maybe it was a coping mechanism of the time and using these earlier events to deal with the present. So yeah, I was surprised by how funny The Dirty Dozen actually is, and the comedic bent to the whole film. What's it about? Well, Major John Reisman, that's the Lee Marvin character. He's a nonconformist, and as punishment, but also to fulfill a mission in World War II, he's given an almost impossible assignment, a suicide mission. Rather than using elite soldiers, he's given 12 military prisoners, made up of murderers, thieves, just violent offenders, who are either on death row. I think about half, or 5 or 6, or 4 or 5 of them maybe are on death row, and the other 6 or 7 have got 20 or 30 years hard labour ahead of them. So he's given these 12 military prisoners, none of them who are accomplished soldiers, and told to train them and go behind German lines and take out assault a chateau that's full of senior German officers, where they apparently meet regularly with an assortment of women. in a relaxed setting. And so the idea is that they're ripe for the picking, and that taking out this whole bunch of German officers will have a massive impact on the German war effort. The lure is that if they survive, they'll earn their freedom, maybe. And so for these guys facing imminent death or a long stretch with nothing to look forward to, the mission is mildly exciting for them. There's no expectation from the military brass that they are going to succeed in the mission and come back. So it's a win-win. It sort of reminded me of Rambo, First Blood Part 2, where John Rambo's sent on a seemingly impossible mission and he's expendable. So all these guys are expendable as well. Nobody expects them to come home. So the film follows the selection of the 12, getting them together. Lee Marvin is the military man trying to whip them into shape. We see their training. We see them forming this team, reacting to each other as men, as they would, turning criminals into soldiers and preparing them for the final assault. This film was directed by Robert Aldrich. It's a name that's familiar to me, but I probably couldn't have told you what other films he'd made. But when I looked at his IMDb, he's made films including Kiss Me Deadly from the mid-50s, which is, I think, a noirish film. Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte. I think Bette Davis might have been in both of those films. He went on to make The Longest Yard, which was that famous prison film with Burt Reynolds in the 70s. I think where the guards played the inmates in American football, which was a big success. So you can already get the picture, and especially if you know anything about The Dirty Dozen, it's straightforward direction. You let the actors and the story dominate. You don't overcomplicate things, and you keep the pace moving. You're there to entertain above all. These are entertaining films that Aldrich made, and he does well. He's like a referee in a sporting contest. A good referee keeps things moving, but doesn't become part of the action. That's how I'd sum up Robert Aldrich. Lee Marvin. For me, he's the ultimate tough guy. This is his film. He's top billed. He's got the standalone role. I know he has a military background. I don't know. I didn't look into that, but I know he does have a military background, whether it's World War II or Korea. For me, he always, it's the voice. It's the voice and the eyes and the deadpan look. He is a tough hombre. That whiskey-soaked voice is that's his hook for me. That's what sets him apart. It seems to come up from deep in his soul, and it's so rough and low by the time it gets out of his mouth. I love it. He brings absolute authority to every role to me. Like he's been around, like he knows everything there is to know about tough situations, and I feel like he's been in a few. I know he was a bit of a hellraiser. I remember seeing an interview, what was it? Maybe on the Michael Parkinson show in the early 80s, I think, maybe around then. And he was talking about some of his wild adventures out on the drink. One of them lying on the top of a car, getting into trouble with the police and talking his way out of it. Just things like that I feel like would have been second nature, excuse me, for Lee Marvin. There were a lot of guys that seemed to be similar around that age. Paul Newman was another guy who I think had a lot of wild times. Steve McQueen, dime a dozen during the 60s in particular. He's so believable in this role. He just brings integrity. I just accept him in this part, and he makes it work. The way that he deals with John Cassavetes early in the film, showing his authority, where he knows Cassavetes is going to come at him, and he just flips him over his shoulder and then kicks him in the face a few times. I could imagine Lee Marvin doing that in real life. And what a career this guy had. I've seen most of his big movies a while ago now, though, which is criminal. I do need to revisit a lot of these. The Killers, Point Blank, Cat Ballou. Cat Ballou is another film my dad remembers fondly, like a comedy western. As is Paint Your Wagon, which wasn't as good. And then in the 70s, he made a lot of kind of... I assume he got paid well for them. Things like The Klansman, which I haven't seen but have a really bad reputation. And then in the 80s, the 80s is when I first encountered him, obviously, because I'm a child of the 80s. That's when I was in my teens. The first time I saw him was in Death Hunt with Bronson again, which I loved that movie. I saw it a few times around the mid-80s. And also Gorky Park with William Hurt. And then I think he died around 87. I didn't look that up, but it's just in my head. He wouldn't have been an old man. I think he aged pretty quick with his lifestyle, and he's got that leathery look to his skin, like he's been outside for nearly all of his life. So I think his hard living probably caught up with him, but geez, what a career he had. Love him. Building the team really becomes the best part of the film for me, and I love the way that Aldrich and whoever wrote the script does this. I love particularly, you've got the early scene where Marvin meets the dozen in the yard, in the prison where they're being held. The stockade, I guess, military prison. And he has to show his authority. He has to show who the alpha in the group is, and he does it sublimely and automatically. I feel it's just probably what Lee Marvin does anyway. But it's great to see, and I love how John Cassavetes challenges him. There'd always be someone out of a dozen men, at least one, who does that. So that was a great scene. And then I love how the script gets Lee Marvin's character to interview the men in their cells one by one, and we see this one after the other. Richard Jekyll is playing the military police guy who's, I guess, Lee Marvin's right-hand man in getting these guys into shape. And he hands him a dossier about each man and before on his way into each cell. And then he sits down and just quickly scans through it and interviews all these guys. The Jim Brown interview I really enjoyed. Jim Brown, of course, was an NFL superstar who then segued into acting quite well and had a pretty decent career. He was in a lot of films like this. I always remember Riot with Gene Hackman in 1969. What else? I saw him in a film called Fingers with Harvey Keitel. He could play a heavy guy very convincingly because he did that for a living. He was bashing guys and crunching bones. I'm not a huge NFL guy. I did used to watch it a bit, but I can't tell you what position he played. But he's an intimidating guy when he wants to be, put it that way. But he's got a lot of charisma. And I thought the racial undertones to this character were handled quite well in that Lee Marvin says something that gets Jim Brown going, and he replies to him in that, "Yes, sir. I understand what you're trying to say, and I'm not going to copy any of it, and you better watch out for me." And he keeps that tone going throughout the film, and he is one of the 2 or 3 real hard men of the dozen. I did like seeing this movie for me, and I'm sure a lot of other people, is a bit of a star spotting exercise. So for me, it was great seeing Donald Sutherland early in his career. I think this is probably the earliest I've seen Donald Sutherland. It's 2 or 3 years out from MASH, which really got things moving for him. And I don't think my parents really recognised him, which is interesting because he's so, to me, so recognisable. He's so tall and kind of gawky, and he always brings the same energy as Christopher Walken for me. There's a comedic bent to both of those actors, and Donald Sutherland has always got a kind of a grin on his face and those eyes popping out of his head. And in this one, he is slightly unrecognisable because he doesn't have his signature moustache that he had for nearly all of his career, and his hair isn't grown out like he usually had it. So I love the part in this film where Marvin makes Sutherland impersonate a general, and he's the worst guy to pick because his character is not the smartest, and he makes a bit of a mess of it and really enjoys himself, and then gets reamed out by Marvin afterwards. Clint Walker is a name that I always recognise that name, but I couldn't have told you anything about him. And when I was watching this, there's this huge guy, muscle bound, but in great, not like really well proportioned. And I said to Dad, who's that massive guy? And he said, I don't know. And I couldn't recall seeing him in anything else. He would have stood out. Like, he is huge. Obviously that's Clint Walker. He acts well in this because his Posey character is like this man mountain with a mouse inside. He's not... It takes a long time to get him going, to get him angry. But eventually there's a great scene with Lee Marvin where he does provoke him. And anyway, I thought Clint Walker does well in this film. Telly Savalas, another interesting guy for me. Like, I was born 5 years after this film came out. When I was growing up, Telly Savalas was always someone that you knew who he was. He's got such a recognisable name, and his bald, larger-than-life persona set him apart as well. Such a unique look, and Kojak was such a huge TV show when I was growing up. Not that I ever saw it. It wasn't beamed into Win TV, which was the TV station on the south coast here in Australia. So I never saw Kojak, but everyone knew who Telly Savalas was. He was just a larger-than-life guy. I guess he was like... who's the guy in Westworld? His name escapes me at the moment, but they were the only two that had that same kind of bald-headed look. That's quite normal now, but I feel like back then it was slightly different. He doesn't have a whole lot to do in this film as Maggot. He's just a complete loony with religious overtones. But the interesting thing for me is that before I watched this last night, when I think of The Dirty Dozen, I think of Telly Savalas. And it's odd because he's really minor in this film. I think what it is that they made 2 or 3 or more sequels to this film in the 80s, and they weren't great. I watched one of them, and before I saw this, and it's not great. But I think he's one of the main guys in those, and they rejuvenated this character probably. So it was odd to me. I went into this expecting that he was one of the main characters, and he really wasn't. But he's perfect for bringing this weird energy for this character. Ernest Borgnine, of course. I saw him not long ago in The Wild Bunch, and it's kind of the same character that he generally plays. He's a big, rotund guy. He's jolly. He's like John Goodman, like a version of John Goodman, I guess, playing the big, fat guy. He always brings an earthy, everyman sensibility to these movies, which is usually needed in some shape or form. He does that in this one, even though he's the major, so he's the boss. But he's still got that gap-tooth laugh and that smile. And I do like the way his character kind of knows what's going on, and he's silently rooting for the Dirty Dozen, which is in tune with what Ernest Borgnine would think anyway, for me. I love the scene later on when they're doing the exercises between Robert Ryan's crew, who I'll get to in a sec, Robert Ryan's crew against the Dozen, and the Dozen don't realise that if they come off second best in that, they're going to be sent home and executed and made to serve their prison terms. And he realises that they are going to take the fort and win the day, and he doesn't want to be there to see the embarrassment, so he quickly extricates himself from the situation. Great scene. On to Robert Ryan. Again, another guy that was in the Wild Bunch, and again, similar role for him. The guy you're rooting against, the guy in the black hat, the unlikable guy, just like in this one. He's the rival. He's Lee Marvin's nemesis. They're both the military men, the real military men in this. They've had fallings out in the past. Lee Marvin finds out that Robert Ryan's men are going to be the ones training the Dozen for the parachute jump aspect of the movie, and he's not looking forward to it. Borgnine yells at him and says he's not going to take any crap from either of them. He doesn't want to hear any complaints. The way that they size up and take each other on during the training and is fantastic. I love seeing that the two alphas go at each other, and that's Ryan and Marvin in this film. So, like I said, the other thing that I realised watching this film that I always feel, and it's the same with movies like Ocean's 11, The Magnificent Seven, any of these films where you get all these guys together for a mission or a heist or a plan, I find that the planning is nearly always more interesting than the mission. And it's about the recruiting, the selection of the men, getting them together, seeing how all the different personalities are, and seeing them shape up and try and stake out their territory, arguments, some fights, the little cliques that break out, and then the training. Watching these strangers slowly becoming a team, I always enjoy those parts more, and especially in this film, I really enjoyed those aspects of it. I do want to specifically mention John Cassavetes as well. For me, he's the scene stealer in this film, and the more I delve into him and his career, the more fascinated I am and the more interested I am in him. And he's definitely stealing so many scenes in this film as Franco. He's the one, like I said, that challenges Lee Marvin at the start in the yard, and he's perfectly cast as Franco. He was a guy who challenged authority in his life, the films that he made, the way that he only did films like this and Rosemary's Baby to pay for his individualistic personal films. There was a great quote I read, and I think it was from the esteemed critic David Thompson, who I think his writing on movies is unrivaled, probably. I don't know, it resonates with me. I think he wrote about Cassavetes as having a shark's grin, and that sums him up perfectly, that when he grins at you, you know you're in trouble. He's planning something, because he's got this grin that doesn't have any warmth to it. It loops up either side of his face like a shark's, and he's got these eyes that look straight through you, and he's got shark's eyes as well. He is intimidating and menacing, even though he's not massive. His physicality actually did surprise me, though, that he holds his own. He seems to be, he's taller and a bit more wiry than I realised. Anyway, perfectly cast. I love seeing him acting. He's known more as a director and for having these personal films, but I love him as an actor too. He's got darkness around him. And he was in The Killers with Lee Marvin. They were those guys in that film. I think Ronald Reagan might have been in that one too. And he made Rosemary's Baby the year after, and he also directed Faces, which was one of his iconic directing efforts. And around this time, I feel like he's putting money in the bank so that he can go on and make Faces and Husbands, Minnie and Moskovitz, all of those early 70s films that he made that are just great. So he was a guy that was already forming a path in Hollywood. Of course, I do want to also call out Charles Bronson. He was one of my earliest movie stars that I love to see, and brings a unique dynamic to me in films because he is a hard man. I feel like his life was harder than most, and I reckon he just came into these movies and just acted as an element of himself. But in this one, he does have more to do than usual. He becomes Marvin's right-hand man. He has this calm confidence. In the German officer scenes, he speaks German, and I don't know whether that was trained or whether with his European background he actually does speak German, but it's convincing. He, along with Jim Brown, are the two hard men in this crew for me, for real. Like, there's a scene where Cassavetes tries to escape, and he gets confronted by Jim Brown and Charles Bronson. I thought, you poor bugger. I would have tried to take on any the other dozen than Jim Brown and Charles Bronson. They are made of granite. And to me, he always looks like a guy who'd be slow to come to the boil, but if he did, watch out. Hard as a rock. The way he acts in this too, he shows a lot more depth than the later parts of his career showed, and I feel like his selection of films later in life probably undermined the great work he had at the start of his career. Magnificent Seven, The Great Escape, this film, Once Upon a Time in the West, even the early 70s with Mechanic and Death Wish, great films. And after that, it kind of went downhill a bit, apart from Death Hunt, which I always loved, but a vastly underrated actor for me. The final mission, when they get to the final mission, the assault isn't disappointing, but it's just, for me, by far the least interesting aspect of the film, apart from Marvin and Bronson impersonating the Germans, because Lee Marvin gets put in some tricky situations because he's the superior officer. That's the impersonation. And he can't speak a word of German, and he's uncomfortable. And I like seeing Lee Marvin uncomfortable because it's rare. So there's some real suspense there that their cover's going to get blown, and you can see some of the Germans looking at him oddly. But once the shooting starts, it really becomes painting by numbers, and the excitement for me was already over, although I did find it credible that some big stars don't make it and die along the way. I like that. But I'd already had the best part of the film, which is watching the 12 come together as a team and watching these guys sort each other out. Easily the best parts of the movie. So lots of things worked for me with this film. Lee Marvin, John Cassavetes, and Charles Bronson stand out in their roles. The ensemble cast was fantastic, and I liked watching a few of these guys really early in their careers. And the humor is fantastic. It all rings true. I can recall times in life being around lots of guys, and the pecking order and how it gets worked out, the camaraderie. It all rang true with this film, so the script is really tight. I love the way that the characters are introduced separately. That was a masterstroke. The interviews in the cells, and the premise of an impossible mission, and knowing that they're not going to make it, most of them, and that balancing of deadly seriousness and death everywhere with comedic touches works really well. The only things that really didn't work for me was that it was a bit too long. Could have lost around 30 minutes. There's about 100 minutes or more on the lead up. And while that is the best part of the film, I think we could have lost at least 10 or 15, but maybe 20 or more, and still had a really great film of 115 minutes maybe. The mission is far less interesting than the prep. I've already said that. It's a blokey film. There's one scene with women in it. They're brought in to entertain the men. After they do well, Lee Marvin recruits. And this is set in England. The training aspect is all in England, so some British girls get brought in. So I guess that's not a gripe. This is I mean, what would I expect? But could have used a bit more colour and female energy. They're in the shadow as well, I guess. But anyway, so I'm glad I saw this film finally and saw it properly and sat down, and love watching it with my mum, but especially my dad. I can see why he had fond memories of it from that time. It must have been a really big event film. And I've now been able to separate it just from that background of being one of the classics that you just don't even think about any further. Oh, yeah, Great Escape, yeah, Bridge on the River Kwai, Dirty Dozen. People already have a set idea about it and don't think more about it. Well, I think I've managed to do that now, so that's great. I don't think... Well, I know this isn't a date film now. It's a bloke's film. Like I said, there's virtually no female characters. I suspect it might have been a date film back in the day. I can imagine lots of ladies being dragged along to this film because it was the big film of the moment. But yeah, not now. I do think it's definitely a hangover film. Absolutely. It's funny. It's positive. There's nothing serious going on underneath. There's no philosophical ideas. It's an easy watch. Great cast spotting, like I said. I do think it's a big mates film. Depending on who your mates are, probably an older generation, but the humour still lands for that generation. The performances are fun to talk about. It's that ribald humour that works well with blokes. So look, really enjoyed finally seeing The Dirty Dozen properly, and I can see why it's a classic. For me, the performances carry it. Lee Marvin giving it that authority and integrity. Charlie Bronson reminding me again what a good actor he was. Hard Times, I always remember that film too as being a bit different from the rest. And showing him display a bit more range. But like I said, John Cassavetes steals almost every scene he's in. He exudes this charisma and something different. He's the yin to everyone else's yang. And interesting time in his career when he was acting a fair bit more than directing. But like I said, the biggest takeaway for me was not the mission. It was everything before it, the interviews and the training and the dynamics of the group coming together and the fighting between them. And that's where films like this really live for me. So why do I always find the people more interesting than the mission? Well, I always care more about the characters and the emotions than the nitty-gritty and the how complex the mission is, or how well thought out the mission might be, or the cleverness of the script. It's always more about the human elements that get me, and the mission becomes a bonus if it's well done. So The Dirty Dozen really reminds me of this dynamic for me. It's not about blowing up a shadow. It's about these 12 flawed individuals put together with nearly no chance of success, and they earn each other's respect. That's the other thing. It's like in war or sport or something. Blokes who are successful in that do it for each other, and it's a team effort. And I think that's the part of the film that's going to stay with me the most. So, yeah, that's it for me. That's The Dirty Dozen. Really enjoyed this watch, and check it out if you can. Like I said, I found it on DVD, but it has been on streaming platforms before, and I'm sure it will be again. So keep an eye out for it. Thanks as always for listening, and see you next time.